Welcome to Coast Vue, the show that every single day celebrates the men and women who are making coastal Mississippi such a great place to live, work, and play. As you know from, if you're a regular listener of Coast Vue, you know we get involved in issues from time to time that are important to coastal Mississippi. One area that we have not avoided having conversations about is the whole issue of the insurance sort of state of affairs in coastal Mississippi. We've discussed in the past as it relates to FEMA's new risk rating 2.0 flood insurance program that's coming down the pike. And we'll be talking more about that here in just a little bit. If you've been paying attention to the news, you may also know that there's been some legislation out there that sought to tinker with the Mississippi wind pool in one way or the other. Again, very interesting. If you do a search on that, you find very little news about it. And I've had this ongoing, really terrific relationship with the State Insurance Commissioner for Mississippi, Mike Chaney. He was on the show about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and we talked about the new FEMA flood program and tried to give you a pretty in-depth view of what that was all about. And now that, there's been discussion about the wind pool, thought it would be a good idea to bring him back in, but we won't just have a conversation about the wind pool and flood insurance. I sort of want to, if you don't know about the State Insurance Office, I want to kind of rebuild some of the foundation for what that office does, what Mike Chaney's goals are. And then we'll kind of branch out and talk more specifically about what's happening with the new flood insurance program that we should all be concerned about here in coastal Mississippi. And then, of course, is there anything in the wind pool area that we need to be concerned about? So we'll get into all those areas before we get done. But let's start with just welcoming Mike Chaney, the State Insurance Commissioner, to Coast Vue. How you doing, Mike?
Doing very well. Very good. The legislature will go home.
I know it's a busy time for you. I know it's a busy time for you. And I know that just before you and I went on the air, you actually had to turn around and turn the legislature off. You had it going live. But you don't know what's going to sort of gyrate out of some of these committees and what's going to, build a head of steam. And as an insurance commissioner, any one bill could really change the course of history for your department. So, as you observe the legislature these days, do you have big concerns, or so far so good?
So I think I got part of your question there, Rick, but I want to be certain. Ask me again what you.
Yeah, as you just on a high level, and we're going to get into some of the details here in just a second. But as you observe the legislature, are there any bills that you believe will clear the legislature that gives you particular concern, or are you just kind of waiting and watching and hoping that it stays the course as you currently see it?
Well, there are some bills that got into the House floor in each one of the chambers or so, and one of them dealt with express grain. At the last minute over on the Senate side, someone put the Department of Insurance to be the keeper of express grains. That's all the grain storage places in the state of Mississippi, and to form an indemnity program and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But when we looked at the cost, it would cost us over $1 million a year to do something like that. And my budget's only around $11 million a year, although the Department of Insurance brings in about $400 million a year in revenue. We're the fifth largest producer of revenue in the state on a very, very small budget. So I think I got that bill killed. So I'm not worried about it. We've had a couple of other things that have slipped in, but by and large, we've got some good legislators that understand what we do, Rick, and we've been able to work through some of that. And I think a lot of that is because I spent 15 years in the legislature, 2 terms in the Senate, and 2 in the House. And I kind of understand the process. I've still got a lot of friends that are left over there, although most of the people I serve with have retired or gone away. So
yeah.
My major thing is to be certain that we have a decent fire service in the state. That's one of the other hats I wear. I'm a state fire marshal. I also have to regulate propane within the state of Mississippi. We do polyndry of just things that nobody would ever suspect that we do, like burglar alarms, smoke alarms. We do fireworks if it's on public property. And that's always an issue when somebody says, I can't shoot fireworks off in my city, and we have to inspect them. And we inspect the Capitol. I've often told this joke. We've got a cadaver dog that we use in search and rescue if you have a catastrophic event. Or so basically, we use them when we have tornadoes and if somebody drowns or we have a catastrophic event. But we take, and we have a bomb dog too that we use to inspect places that have fires and mysterious fires. But we use the bomb dog in the Capitol. Every Monday morning we go over when the legislature's in session and search everything. And I tell this joke about the bomb dog was busy one Monday and we took the cadaver dog. And after 8 hours, my chief deputy, Rick Davis, called me and said, "Commissioner, the dog's not back." I said, "What's wrong?" He said, "He thinks everybody's over there as a cadaver." So I don't know, it's just kind of a joke. That's not true. But
so Mike, at the beginning though, and we're going to come back. We'll cover some of the major areas that your department is involved in. But you mentioned Express Grain. And I'm assuming that this is a reaction to what's happening in Greenwood with the filing of bankruptcy there and holding all the farmers, holding tens of millions of dollars and all the creditors that are going to be impacted. The fact that so many people were caught off guard by that. I've talked a little bit about it on the show. I had the speaker on. We talked about it. He seemed quite aware of what was happening. A couple of my farmer friends, some of my dear farmer friends, who are just closest friends with me, were left holding the bag on some of that money. But I think there's got to be something done. But I think maybe this approach, as you saw, it probably wasn't the right approach.
Well, some simple things you could do to fix that problem. And I used to farm as a hobby because I used to be a pretty avid duck hunter, and so my farm evolved. I went from 1,000 acres to 0, which is probably good. But what you can do in the grain business is you audit the inventories every quarter. And I suggested to one of the chairmen yesterday and some long conversations that what they should consider is allowing the state auditor, utilize the state auditor since he wants to be out front on everything. And you let him go in and audit every 3 months to make certain that you don't. Rick, you may remember Billy Saul Estes in Texas and the great fertilizer scheme where they would pump fertilizer from one tank to another to say that they had all of these inventories. You can't do that with grain, but you can prevent falsification of inventory levels. You can verify the audits and make the auditor send a copy to the Commissioner of Agriculture so you know the grain's there. I don't think you can protect the farmer against rises and falls in the commodity market, but most farmers will usually book half of their expected production on the market, what we call the futures market, so they can ensure at least some profit. And the third thing you can do is probably look at making everybody have a federal license, although I'm not sure I would want that, because then you get the federal government into everything that you have, and that usually it gets screwed up more than it helps. But there's some simple things that can be done.
Well, for people on the coast who may not really appreciate what you and I are talking about, think of it when you drive up into parts of Mississippi, and if you've been to Greenwood before, you'll know that there are these very large grain bins that go way up in hot sky-rise grain bins. And what the farmers do is they make commitments they lock prices in at a certain number as the season goes on. They decide what they're going to plant. Are they going to plant cotton this year? They're going to plant soybeans this year. They're going to plant corn this year. And so what they do is they lock in the prices. They take all of their crops. Once they've gotten to a point where they can take them, they bring them to the grain bins, and then they're paid. That's how this works. And what's going to be interesting about the issue in Greenwood is we still don't fully appreciate what happened. There's this complex relationship that was going on with the banks. There's some thought that maybe some money was still in the bank that would have paid farmers, and it's very complex. Ultimately, they filed bankruptcy, and so you've got plaintiff lawyers involved now. You've got individual farmers and collectively being represented, and you've got the banks being represented. You've got bankruptcy judges and bankruptcy lawyers involved. It's a web really complicated web. And it'll be interesting to see what comes out on the other end and see if there are some safeguards beyond what's being talked about today that could help farmers. And that really impacts the rest of Mississippi. And there really probably needs to be a place where this lands. It would seem to me maybe a relationship between the state auditor and maybe the state ag commissioner would be something that would be considered. But it's a surprise to me to see that there was a bill involving the insurance commissioner. And that doesn't involve most coastal Mississippians, but anything like that happens in Mississippi is not good for the whole state. That's for sure. And hopefully we can put some safeguards in that will keep that from happening in the future. Anything else on that point before we shift gears?
Well, one thing I want to say, Rick, is if that bill were to become law with us inserted, we would end up having to regulate every self-insured program in the state of Mississippi because it has ramifications far and above what you may have just from checking express grain out. And that's some other things that we can do to protect the farmer. I'm on the farmer side on this. We need to bring the banking department in.
I am big time on the farmer side on this. They have to know they can trust where they bring their grain. That is really important, not just to them and the family, but the residual impact, the economic impact to that region of not paying the farmers is going to be absolutely significant. Hey, when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with the Insurance Commissioner for the state of Mississippi, Mike Chaney. We'll see you after this break. Welcome back to Coast Vue. I'm having a terrific conversation with my old friend Mike Chaney, who's the Mississippi Insurance Commissioner. And, we worked together back when I was publisher of the Sun Herald. And here you are. You're still here. And the way I would describe it is you're a man who's sort of gone through many iterations in your life. As you mentioned, at 49, you probably could have checked it all in, but you've done stints in the House of Representatives, you've done stints in the Senate. And I should point out that Mike said it was fine for me to say this, but at 78 years old, there seems to be no slowing down in you. What keeps you going?
Well, it's not about the money because these jobs just don't pay very much. We don't make much more than a school teacher with 25 years of experience. So that needs to be pointed out. But I want to leave the state better than I found it. It's a way to be a steward, to do part of your stewardship to this world. If you're a Christian, you can say it's kind of a missionary type work. It's a way to make a difference for a lot of people in the state. And along those lines, Rick, we deal a lot with health insurance in the state of Mississippi, so I'm really in the healthcare business, whether I like to admit it or not. And that goes back to when Obamacare came about. Whether you agree with Obamacare or not, it's a reality, and we call it the Affordable Care Act today. We've kind of gotten away from these other names, but that affects every person in the state of Mississippi. So I tell folks when I'm out speaking that I affect someone 6 months before they're born to 6 months after they die. And that means prenatal care for the mother who's expecting a child. And if somebody's been buried, trying to pay for the final funeral expenses if they have burial insurance. And everything in between there, which includes homeowners insurance, insurance on their automobiles, you just name it. We are involved in it. We touch just about every life in the state of Mississippi in more than one way.
And what's interesting about you, when I went to a leadership program, there were like 9 different countries, people from 9 different countries involved in it. Some really fascinating people. And one day I'll share with you some of them. One in particular from Nicaragua. But anyway, we had a program, and one of the studies we did is on the insurance industry and how it's changing rapidly in a digital age. This is as we began to see online insurance companies come to fruition, and the competitive landscape started to change dramatically, and it got complex quick. Has the digitization of insurance companies, in other words, some online companies that only do business online, and you have brick and mortar insurance companies, has it been hard to keep up with? Are there more players today that you have to say grace over, say, than 10 years ago, or are there less? What's the state of affairs as it relates to keeping up with the competitive landscape?
So let's divide the players into old players over on one side that have been around for a long time, and new players over here that are people that are innovative in what they're doing. So you've got something like Lemonade that you can buy insurance online right at the moment that you need it. We've got an innovation that we're working on now. Actually, we'll have conversations later this week where someone can buy their health insurance online, be in the Affordable Care Act, get a tax credit if you need it, and verify your income, and you get to negotiate with a doctor what you can pay, what he's willing to charge you, and he knows what the card's going to pay. They give you a Visa card, basically. To the other side, where you have the conventional people like the Blue Cross Blue Shields who are not in the Affordable Care Act, who deal basically in groups and still are working, although they're innovative in some steps, working towards things that they were doing 25 years ago. They just hadn't innovated enough. And so we get involved with what's covered between the drugs. So we're involved in pharmaceutical costs. We're involved in formularies. And that's not something we should be doing, but we're involved in it because of health insurance. So that's just one thing. The health insurance side is so innovative. Now, what we are really dealing with is what do you do about somebody taking cryptocurrency as payment for our insurance premiums, and how do you address that if a company keeps that in their surplus, which is required by law to make certain they can pay you a claim. And I had a lawyer tell me yesterday, we were having a conversation with some folks about cryptocurrency and cyber, and he said, look, it's like somebody bought a house and they used Bitcoin to pay for the house, and we put that Bitcoin into our escrow account, and the next day Bitcoin drops 10%. We're responsible for that escrow account. How do we account for that? So we're working. I hope I made that problem kind of simple, but it's not a stable currency.
Right. It's really incredible how complicated it is. You know, I was looking through this list of things that you're involved in as part of your regular duties. Okay, Health Insurance Management Board, Mississippi Automotive Insurance Plan, Mississippi Comprehensive Health Insurance Risk Pool Association, Mississippi Fire Personnel Minimum Standards and Certification Board, Mississippi Fire Prevention Code Board of Adjustments and Appeals, Mississippi Insurance Guarantee Association, Property and Casualty, that is, Mississippi Life Health Insurance Guarantee Association, Mississippi Tort Claims Board. I mean, listen, I could keep reading. The list is long. It's very long. How is your department structured so that you can make sure that you're paying attention to what you need to be paying attention to?
That's a great question, Rick, because I sure can't do it all. I'm a jack of all trades, so to speak, and a master of none. And so I have a lot of lawyers that work for us. At one time, those lawyers were supplied by the Attorney General's office, and that was prior to 2016. The department would be granted monies in their budget, and we would pay it to the Attorney General. So we had some control over how many lawyers we had. When we became a general fund agency instead of a special funds agency, that meant instead of the dollars that we generate, we didn't get to keep any of them to operate the agency. The Attorney General decided how many attorneys we needed. So I found that the Attorney General was not sending us the attorneys that we needed, one, and they were keeping the money that they were allocated to give us attorneys. So I was about $600,000 short, and I got the legislature to change that. So I got all my PINs. That means personal identification numbers to come back to the department. And we have our own attorneys. We do not have AG attorneys. If you can imagine writing just use an example, writing a State Farm and saying, I'm an attorney general, and after they'd been sued 10 times by them, they're not going to answer a complaint. So yeah, we have a lot of attorneys, and each attorney specializes in some area. We got somebody that handles life insurance, somebody that handles health, and all of these attorneys do not practice law. Some of them just have law degrees. I've got 2 research assistants that do nothing but research on healthcare. One of them's a Methodist minister with a law degree, and the other one's a lawyer that just didn't want to practice law. And then you have lawyers that will help us in things like fire protection and minimum standard boards of what we need to be doing at the fire academy. I'm responsible for training first responders. That's people that come to the Gulf Coast after you have a hurricane or a catastrophic event and respond. It's not the local folks, it's the firefighters that end up going down. So that's an issue for us when you talk about current legislation. There's been a move not to fund some of the first responders, although the governor just signed a bill recently on first responders where we give them some dollars for if they get cancer or COVID-19. But it's a complexity where we use experts in our own field, and I have to depend upon those folks to tell me the truth. And you got to have great communication. If you don't communicate, you can't run an agency correctly. And so when we send, you know this from dealing with me, if I send an email out, I'll normally have 5 people on that email, and the first one listed is the one that's responsible. The others are for information. So when we have staff meetings, everybody knows what each other's doing, and there's no surprises. And we interact a lot. Our consumer division handles 13,000 calls a year, not complaints, but just inquiries. We had about 1,200 complaints last year. We returned $27 million in lost insurance, life insurance proceeds straight to the consumers, never went through the legislature last year. You don't see that in the newspaper. That's not something, it's not newsworthy. But if we do anything, if we hiccup or somebody doesn't like what we do, the bad news is what's printed. You know what I'm saying? So I try to do the right thing and just say, come on, folks, let's just keep on rolling and do the right thing and depend upon each other to do the work they're assigned to do.
Well, as my friend Haley Barber often said, that news media doesn't cover airplanes that land safely. That's right. That's just the way it works. You know, it is. There's a lot to say grace over. That's for sure. I'm curious. You know, what is your role? We'll come to the legislature here in just a second, and whatever tinkering might have been done with the wind pool or attempted to be done. What's your role with the wind pool? And describe to people on the coast and really across Mississippi who may not be aware of this, why the wind pool is important and what your role has been in the wind pool over years.
All right, so I'm going to address that kind of succinctly in a way that the wind pool came about. The wind pool was actually formed in 2007 with House Bill 1500. We had a House bill and Senate bill. They were exact. Dean Kirby, who was chair in the Senate, flipped the coin. The House won, so it became a House bill. And I was on the insurance committees, so I'm very familiar with HB 1500. What HB 1500 did was it was a bill to enhance economic development of the Gulf Coast after Hurricane Katrina. It was called the Economic Impact Act at that time. So the wind pool set up a board that was responsible for supplying wind and hail insurance to the Gulf Coast, which was not available in the lower 6 counties. And that's the 3 along the coast. And then you have George and the other 3 counties above the Gulf Coast. Those counties were to be able to have affordable wind and hail insurance, because at the time that we had Katrina, wind and hail insurance would normally cost you a couple $100 a year. It went from a couple of $100 to a couple of $1,000 a year, and consumers just could not pay that. So where we fit in is we regulate the rates for the wind pool, what they can charge consumers, and we regulate the amount of reinsurance that they can buy. So we make certain that they have enough reinsurance or service to cover a shortage in case it's catastrophic.
When we come back, we can continue a conversation about the wind pool and explain we'll explain what reinsurance is. It's really a critical component to something like a wind pool, and we'll explain that to you here in just a second. But when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Mike Chaney, the Commissioner of Insurance for the state of Mississippi. He's also the State Fire Marshal. We'll see you when we come back. Welcome back to Coast Vue. We're having a conversation with Mike Chaney, the Mississippi Insurance Commissioner, and in the first couple of seconds, we just kind of rebuilt what they're all involved in. It's just an amazing number of activities related to insurance in the state of Mississippi. When we went to break, we were talking about the wind pool and the importance of what the wind pool did for us after Hurricane Katrina. Because as most people on the coast know, if you weren't here at the time, you're not aware. But after Hurricane Katrina hit, there was a lot of instability in the insurance market in coastal Mississippi. And that was actually really important to us because people had to make decisions to rebuild. So not only did you have new ABFE requirements coming down from FEMA, which decided how much higher you had to build your house if you had more than 50% damage. And then on top of that, you had to be able to get wind coverage in order to get a mortgage. And so this was a really, really important issue. So as the commissioner pointed out before we went to break, a bill was passed that ultimately created what is called essentially the state wind pool. And then there's a board that helps to regulate the rates of the wind pool, and also the focus on how much reinsurance is necessary. And this is all about risk. But when we went to break, I mentioned we'll describe, for people who have heard the term reinsurance but don't really understand what that means. Explain what it is, and then how do you establish how much you need on something that's sort of important as the state wind pool.
Well, the state wind pool has $2.4 billion in coverage. That means they've got 12,000 homes, and the value of those homes in commercial businesses, basically churches, is $2.4 billion. So the wind pool has, let's say, $350 million in surplus. They need $50 million to operate, so you got $300 million in surplus that you could use to pay claims with, and you have to rebuild that, And if you want to have at least a third coverage of all the insured value you've got, which would be about $800 million, then you take the $300 million from the $800 million, you need $500 million in reinsurance. So reinsurance is really assigning the risk to somebody else. It says that if we have a storm and $100 million of damage is covered, that's the damage you have. Let's say the wind pool will cover the first $100 million out of their $300 million surplus. The next $200 million in loss would be covered by reinsurance. So you just take some of that risk and give it to somebody else. Now, to get them to do that, you got to pay them some money. So money's always involved, money and power. It's all about money. So you pay them, and used to you'd have rates that would go as high as 10%. So if I needed $100 million in reinsurance coverage, I would pay $10 million to get $100 million in coverage. It's like playing cards at casinos. If you had to go buy that same reinsurance today, it's about 4% because interest rates are very low, and that may not last forever. So we buy our reinsurance at the wind pool early, and it's at 4%. We bought $465 million in reinsurance this year at the wind pool, and it cost us about $19 million for all of those dollars that we bought in reinsurance. We take about $19 million in on premiums. So that means there was zero. We have zero numbers to operate on. Well, there's something called the non-admitted fee that goes to the wind pool, and that's 3% fees on non-admitted companies. That's surplus lines companies, which are big on the coast. They don't pay into the guarantee funds. So the wind pool gets 3% from those companies on the premiums they sell and the policies they sell. That's $18 million right now. And the lieutenant governor wanted to keep all that $18 million, and he and I disagreed. I thought part of it needs to stay in the wind pool. So long story short, he wanted to move it into the state health plan, and they need $140 million, not $18 million. And we made a deal at the last minute. I mean, the last minute, 1 minute to 10 on Tuesday morning of last week or so. And I agreed that I would not give the wind pool any rate request during 2022 if he would give us $8 million at least out of the Senate bill, and it's up to the House to approve that at the present time. He agreed. I gave him a signed letter, and since I'm the sole person or the agency that can approve rate increases. Now, here's what the public really wants to know. We needed $6 million to keep rates level. Otherwise, we were going to have a 23% increase in rates. In addition to that, the wind pool was contemplating a 10% rate request to me, and that's 10% of $19 million would be about $2 million. And so there's no magic in the numbers. You got $6 million to prevent a 23% rate increase, and $2 million to prevent another 10% rate increase. We put that in the wind pool. If we don't have a hurricane this year, we'll be okay for next year and probably will not have another rate increase. But the problem here is it's crazy. But if we keep the wind pool rates down low, artificially low, then the admitted companies won't write any wind insurance on the coast. So people can't buy wind insurance. They come from private companies like Allstate, State Farm, Nationwide, and all the other companies. They come back to the wind pool, and it's called repopulate, which means you got to have more reinsurance because you have more value in the wind pool. It gets complicated, but bottom line is we've got the best run wind pool in the country right now. And let me name some folks on there. Companies that are on the wind pool board because they're the ones we assess if it's a short, are USAA, State Farm, Allstate, and Farm Bureau. Farm Bureau is the second largest writer in the state, so they need to be on that board. And then you have Scott Lemon from Lemon Motor has been chair, done an excellent job. This guy's got more integrity, just good man, and just understands the problems of what people on the coast face. We got Jeffrey Carver with Union Standard out of Meridian's on the board, and Jeffrey's one of the statewide people that gets appointed. He is a super guy. He's on the reinsurance committee. We've got Frank Genzer, who's an architect on the Gulf Coast, Mark Combs, who's in real estate, and then we have Greg Cullum, who's with Hub on the Gulf Coast. He took longtime member Bobby Portwood's place when Bobby retired. Bobby contributed so much to this state. Doesn't get a lot of thanks for what he did, but Greg's there. So you got a very, very solid board. And then the other member, the one that balances out so you don't have even numbers, is the state treasurer, David McRae. And he makes a few meetings because he's a key vote for us. Lynn Fitch served for 8 years, and prior to that, Tate Reeves, when he was state treasurer, was on for 4 years when they formed the board. And by the way, I need to go back and say in 2006, Rick, we passed building codes in the state due to Katrina. I happened to be chair of education at that time, and the coast was short about $800 million for schools to rebuild them. And the federal government said, we'll give you the money, but you got to have building codes. And when that came about, Haley Barber worked with us. You know, Haley was a great guy to work with. He didn't care who got the credit. He wanted the job done, kind of like where most of us are, like you are, Rick. You're a lot like that. So we've done a lot to help the Gulf Coast and meet those FEMA guidelines that you had to meet. And that's important. I hope I talked way too much about that. But
no. That's all. Hey, that's all really, really important stuff. And I think what I want to do to kind of summarize a bit is simply say that we knew when we developed a wind pool in Mississippi that it was going to be fragile. And it was going to be risky because if we look at what had happened in other states, some have not done this very well and had issues along the way. But what we had done here in Mississippi, and I think it helped not to get, another major storm like Katrina, and it gave us a chance to kind of build a bit of a head of steam. But with good leadership and funding, and a relatively stable, I say a relatively stable reinsurance market. I know that from year to year, there are times when you are very deeply concerned about whether you'll be able to negotiate the kind of deals that you need to be able to make it work. And I know from, you maintain good relationships. Does it still require, incidentally, for you guys to go over to London?
You have to go to London. I don't go to London. That's not on my bucket list to do. I used to have a farm in Africa back when I was real young, and among other things in my to-do life. So I don't go to London. I've been to Bermuda, but that's a tough trip. You got a lot of people there. But let me say this about the reinsurance market. There's a lot of logic in why I wanted the lieutenant governor and the speaker to be on board with $8 million. We had a commitment good through the 3rd or 4th of March to have level prices on our reinsurance. We bought it. We paid for it. Let me tell you what's happened with the Ukrainian-Russian war. A lot of the people that have postponed their reinsurance purchases are looking at twice what they thought they were going to pay. It's rugged for people in North Carolina and South Carolina. Actually, I'm meeting with 14 commissioners later this week. Very privately, we're looking at the impact of that war on insurance and all the other issues. It'll impact the Gulf Coast. And we talked about express grain, Rick. Let me tell you how that works. If you got those grain elevators and those silos at Gulfport, it affects all of you. If you got pogo fish and the silo somewhere over in Pascagoula, it affects all of them too. So there's a lot more to this than we talk about.
Well, complicated stuff. What I want to do when we come back after the break, and we'll jump right into the latest on flood insurance, but I want to hear, why was the legislature tinkering with our wind pool at a time when we created what was one of the best practices in America? I mean, I don't get that. We'll have that conversation in just a second.
We really need to have that conversation.
When we return with Mike Chaney, the state insurance commissioner. We'll see you after this break. Welcome back to Coast Vue, the final segment, and I appreciate you having the opportunity to join us today with Mike Chaney, the Commissioner of Insurance, and we really covered a lot. But hey, listen, real quick, and we'll move over to the latest on the flood insurance. But why tinker with the wind pool, Mike, at a time when we've built this best practice and it's working properly, and others are looking to us for leadership on that? Why would we tinker with it?
I really don't have an answer for it, except there's some legislators and some of the leadership do not think the wind pool should get the $18 million that they're getting from non-admitted fees. They think they should be using the surplus, and that's simply because they don't understand insurance. And it's a hard education issue. And then you have legislators that are elected that instantly become experts in every field, including insurance. And I can tell you, it's insurance is not something you learn overnight unless you're paying a lot of premium, and then you learn about it. But it's something that I don't dwell in. I don't talk about it a lot, but I do say this. If you can't finance a project, it's usually because you can't insure it. If you can't insure it, you can't borrow money from a bank. It's just that simple. And if you keep messing with a wind pool program, you're going to destroy it. And it gets complicated. It goes back to 2015 when the Doyle-Frank Act went into effect, and rates went from 3% to 5% on unadmitted fees. And we put a 3-year repealer in at the suggestion of the governor at that time to prevent, we didn't know what was going to happen. We moved from 5% back down to 3% to keep levels rate. And then you get accused of robbing the reinsurance for some of the members of the board. So it gets real complicated. And the bottom line is some of the leadership's tired of some of the rhetoric they hear from other folks. But bottom line is we got good leaders in the state. And if they'll sit down and listen to us, we can usually work things out.
So we'll shift gears, and you and I have spent a couple segments together talking about specifically what's happening with the new FEMA program, Risk Rating 2.0. They kind of snuck it in on us. There's a lack of transparency in terms of rate calculation, et cetera. For new homes, it went into effect October the 1st of last year, actually. And then as people start to renew this year, you'll start to see the impact. What's interesting is I live on the water, previously did not require, I'm at an elevation where I live where it's not, flood insurance is not required, but I have it anyway. And called them and said, I want to know what the new rates are going to be. Well, they can't tell me that until we renew. So I really believe there's the way that this is kind of this sleeping giant that's going to impact people. For people, as you and I discussed before, that are going to be hit who are currently grandfathered in on the flood insurance program. There is no longer grandfathering, so they're going to be doing full rate, risk assessment of all homes. And essentially what they'll do is they'll determine a target price for your home if you're now on flood insurance, and it can go up 18% a year until it reaches that target number. Now, the other thing is interesting is that the target number could actually change from year to year. So there could be a moving target here on top of that. But over time, the cumulative impact of these additional rate increases could be very significant to coastal Mississippi. And there's virtually nothing written about this. I mean, Mike, I did a search just a few minutes ago. There's literally no stories written about this. So what are you hearing these days?
Well, there are a couple of things that people need to understand. The best thing you've got if you already have flood insurance is an 18% max cap. If you don't have flood insurance, the news is even worse than you can imagine. You're probably looking at a rate of $1,000 minimum for flood insurance, maybe upwards of $2,000, $3,000. It's based on cost of the home. And then you complicate that when you think about, we've talked a lot about the wind pool, but if you're in the wind pool, you're required to have flood insurance if you're below a certain elevation. So I took that in consideration when I gave Deborah that letter, simply because I understood I couldn't live on the coast at a increase of $2,000 a year or $5,000 a year for flood insurance, and the same thing for my wind and hail insurance, and then face inflation on the other side, just on the casualty side. And that means that we're looking at inflation factors right now, just 6% a month. So we may be looking at a 40% inflation factor, which would almost double your insurance rates on your home if you're not careful. And that's a big concern of us. That's one of the reasons we're meeting with all these commissioners. What do you do for all those people in the coastal areas. 60% of the country lives close to coastal areas. It's not just coastal, it's inland too. How do you control flood insurance? So that's the reason that we're looking at trying to bring more admitted companies into the business of writing flood. And we've been successful in that end. But at the same time, Rick, things that haven't been talked about, I got Palomar's leaving the Gulf Coast. They've got 3,000 policies. I've just got notice Fed National's leaving. They've got 4,000 policies. And what we're doing is I'm negotiating with other companies to come in and take those loads up. Can you imagine dumping 7,000 policies back into the wind pool? That's almost $2 billion in coverage. It's crazy. So,
well, Mike, we're at the end of our time together, but here's the main point I want to make on the insurance issue. If you're not paying attention to the risk rating 2.0 program from FEMA, I would, and you have flood insurance now, I would make a call to your agent and start to understand how it's going to impact you. And we're going to continue to keep this conversation going. Hopefully there'll be more media that pay attention to this, because, man, I'm telling you, you do a search on it right now, and there's a lot of stories from Florida, as I pointed out the last time you and I talked.
Right.
Because they have more flood insurance policies than any other state, but Mississippi's going to be hit hard. Anyway, Mike, thank you for what you do, buddy, and it's been great catching up with you.
Thank you, Rick. Always a pleasure.
It's a pleasure, too. This has been Mike Chaney, the State Insurance Commissioner. Have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow.